The Calarian's scaled hide rippled with satisfaction as he passed a group of trembling Vorthan cadets. They pressed themselves against the wall, their 4 eyes wide with the kind of respect that came from watching their bunkmate get psychologically dissected the previous cycle. Zolt's forked tongue flicked out briefly, tasting their fear in the recycled air. Delicious. Another successful batch, he mused to himself, his internal voice dripping with the same condescension he reserved for his students. 23 standard cycles as head combat instructor, and he had never, not once, failed to break a recruit who needed breaking. The Academy's success rate spoke for itself. Graduates left here either as proper soldiers or as cautionary tales. The Calarian military doctrine was simple: identify weakness, exploit it, eliminate it. Whether in battle or in training made no difference. Zolth had perfected this approach into an art form. The Ethereal Council had even commended his methods, though they used polite words like thorough and effective. He preferred devastating. His clawed feet clicked against the pristine floors as he approached Training Bay 7. Today's agenda included a fresh batch of recruits from the outer systems, mostly Andromedans and Centaurians, with a few scattered species that barely registered on the galactic intelligence scale, standard fodder for his standard treatment. But there was something else on today's roster that made his vertical pupils narrow with anticipation. A human. From Earth. One of those barely evolved primates from the third spiral arm who somehow convinced the council they belonged among proper military personnel. Zolth's mandibles clicked in what passed for laughter among his kind. Humans. They called their mudball a Deathworld, as if surviving on a planet with weather patterns and large predators made them special. Please, every Calarian hatchling survived trials that would reduce a human to whimpering paste. He had read the species files, of course. Short lifespans, limited technological development until recently, and an unfortunate tendency toward emotional decision-making. Their so-called military history consisted mostly of fighting each other with primitive weapons over resources and ideological differences. This would be entertaining, at least. Breaking a human would provide an excellent demonstration for the other recruits about the importance of knowing one's place in the galactic hierarchy. The door to Training Bay 7 hissed open, and Instructor Zylth-Ka stepped inside, ready to begin another perfect day of crushing dreams and building character. And there, standing with casual indifference in the back row, was the human. Zolth had to suppress a snort of amusement. The file had listed her as Sarah Chen, but honestly they all looked the same to him. Small, soft, pathetically fragile. This one barely reached his shoulder, with that ridiculous mammalian hair and those tiny forward-facing eyes that screamed prey species. Her uniform hung loose on her slight frame, making her look even more insignificant. What truly irritated him, though, was her expression. Or rather, the complete lack of one. While every other recruit in the room radiated appropriate levels of nervousness and intimidation, the human looked bored. She was actually examining her fingernails. Her fingernails, as if she had somewhere more important to be. Attention, maggots. Zolth's voice boomed through the training bay, echoing off the reinforced walls. Every recruit jerked straighter, except for Chen, who glanced up with mild interest before returning to her nail inspection. A ripple of whispers passed through the other recruits. He caught fragments in various languages, heard they eat their own dead, survived ice ages, cousin's friends saw one punch through metal. Ridiculous propaganda, obviously. These primitives had clearly spread some wild stories about their capabilities to compensate for their obvious inadequacies. The Andromedan next to Chen leaned over and whispered something urgent in broken standard. Chen's response was a slight shrug, and what looked suspiciously like an eye roll. An eye roll. At him. In his own training facility. Zolth's scaled hide bristled with indignation. In 23 cycles, no recruit had ever shown him such blatant disrespect. This pathetic little mammal was actively undermining his authority simply by existing in his presence. Well, that settled it. He had planned to ease into today's session with some basic intimidation and psychological groundwork. But clearly this human needed a more direct approach. Making an example of her would serve dual purposes, crushing her obvious delusions of adequacy while reminding the other recruits why they feared him. Time for some old-fashioned Calarian education. You! Zolth pointed one razor-sharp claw directly at Sarah. Human. Front and center. Now. Sarah looked up from her nails, sighed like she was being asked to take out the trash, and ambled forward with all the urgency of continental drift. The other recruits shuffled nervously, creating a wide circle around what they clearly expected to be a massacre. "Do you know who I am, meat sack?" Zylth loomed over her, his full 2.5-meter height casting her in shadow. His breath, intentionally made more sulphurous for intimidation purposes, washed over her face. "Let me guess," Sarah said, her voice carrying the kind of flat delivery that made sarcasm an art form. "You are the big scary lizard man who is supposed to make me cry and beg for my mommy." Several recruits gasped. The Andromedan actually made a choking sound. Zylth's eye twitched. "I am Instructor Zylth-Ka, and I have broken tougher specimens than you without working up a sweat. You pathetic little mammals think you are so special because you crawled out of your mud pit and learned to use fire." "Wow," Sarah nodded solemnly. "That is really impressive. Do you want a cookie? I think I have some in my locker." The silence that followed was so complete that Zylth could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. Nobody, absolutely nobody, had ever offered him baked goods in response to his intimidation routine. "Physical assessment," he barked, his voice cracking slightly. "Standard endurance protocol. You will run the perimeter until you collapse, then crawl the final lap on your belly like the worm you are." "Okay," Sarah shrugged. "Sounds fun." "Fun." She called his carefully designed humiliation exercise fun. 20 minutes later, Zylth was seriously questioning everything he thought he knew about human physiology. Sarah had not only completed the 5-kilometer run without breaking a sweat, but she had been humming the entire time. Some irritating little tune that was now stuck in his head. "Gravity resistance training," Zylth announced desperately, cranking the bay's artificial gravity to twice Calarian standard. "Let us see how your fragile bones handle real weight." Sarah stretched casually as the increased gravity took hold. "Oh good, this feels more like home. Earth gravity is about 1.2 times what you just set it to." She was lying. She had to be lying. The readings on his scanner were clearly malfunctioning. But as Sarah began doing what appeared to be some sort of bizarre human ritual dance involving rhythmic jumping movements while maintaining perfect form, Zylth felt the first cold tendril of doubt creeping into his perfectly organized worldview. No. Absolutely not. Zylth refused to accept that this tiny mammal was anything more than lucky. 23 cycles of experience told him that every species had a breaking point, and humans were no exception. He just needed to apply more pressure. "Combat simulation," he announced, his voice taking on the kind of edge that usually made recruits reconsider their life choices. "Maximum difficulty setting. You will face 12 Calarian war drones in close-quarters combat." The other recruits exchanged horrified glances. Even the Academy's best graduates rarely survived more than 3 drones on standard difficulty. Sarah perked up with what looked suspiciously like genuine interest. "Ooh, finally something that sounds challenging. Do I get weapons, or are we talking bare hands here?" "Standard issue training blade and energy shield," Zylth snarled, gesturing to the equipment rack. "Though I doubt you will last long enough to use either effectively." The simulation arena materialized around them. A maze of obstacles and narrow corridors designed to prevent escape. 12 sleek combat drones, powered up with ominous mechanical whirs, their red targeting lasers painting Sarah's small form like a deadly constellation. Zylth settled back to watch the inevitable carnage, already composing the incident report in his mind. Training accident sounded appropriately tragic. What followed was not a combat exercise so much as a masterclass in creative problem-solving that left Zylth questioning his understanding of basic physics. Sarah did not fight the drones so much as orchestrate their destruction through a series of increasingly improbable accidents. She used the training blade to redirect energy beams into each other, turned the maze's own obstacles into impromptu catapults, and at one point actually convinced 2 drones to crash into each other by making faces at them. By the time the last drone sparked and died, Sarah was barely breathing hard while several pieces of expensive training equipment were now decorating the arena walls in ways the manufacturers had definitely not intended. "Technical victory," Zylth declared desperately. "But you destroyed Academy property. Clearly you lack proper control and discipline." "I stayed within the rules," Sarah pointed out reasonably. "You said defeat the drones. You did not say keep the furniture intact." Frustrated beyond rational thought, Zylth activated his personal combat armor, its intimidating bulk and weapon systems designed to inspire appropriate terror in unruly recruits. The helmet's voice modulator made his words echo with mechanical menace. Personal combat assessment. I will demonstrate proper Calarian combat technique while you attempt to defend yourself. What was supposed to be a routine demonstration of overwhelming superiority lasted approximately 30 seconds. Sarah ducked under his first swing, used his own momentum to redirect his charge, and somehow managed to trip him over a piece of debris that definitely had not been there moments before. As Zylth crashed to the ground with the grace of a falling asteroid, Sarah's elbow caught his helmet's emergency release during what she would later insist was a perfectly innocent attempt to help him up. The reinforced combat helmet, pride of Calarian military engineering, cracked down the middle with a sound like breaking pottery. In the sudden silence that followed, Zylth found himself staring up at his human recruit through a spider web of fractured transparent steel, feeling remarkably exposed and significantly less intimidating than usual. For the first time in 23 cycles, Instructor Zylth-Ka experienced something he had forgotten existed: genuine fear. Not the calculated intimidation he used on recruits, but the bone-deep primitive terror of a predator realizing it had been stalking something far more dangerous than itself. His exposed face, normally hidden behind the helmet's intimidating facade, showed every flicker of panic as Sarah crouched down beside him with the casual concern of someone checking on a fallen pet. "Oh no, did I break your fancy hat?" she asked, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "I am so sorry, I was really trying to hold back too." Hold back. Those two words hit Zylth like a cargo transport to the thorax. "Hold back?" he wheezed, his voice sounding pathetically small without the helmet's modulation. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "Yeah, this whole thing has been like playing with kids, you know? I mean, the gravity here is lighter than my grandmother's retirement home on Luna Colony. The combat drones move slower than our training bots did in elementary school. And that endurance run." The training bay doors hissed open as other instructors, drawn by the unusual sounds of combat equipment being creatively disassembled, began filtering in. Deputy Instructor Korth took one look at Zylth sprawled on the ground with his broken helmet and made a choking sound. "You see," Sarah continued conversationally, apparently unconcerned by the growing audience, "humans have this funny little quirk in our evolution. We are what you might call persistence predators. We do not give up, ever. We chase our prey until it drops dead from exhaustion, then we eat it, and when something tries to eat us instead, well," she shrugged, "we get creative." More instructors were gathering now, their expressions ranging from stunned disbelief to barely concealed amusement. Zylth caught sight of his colleague Vextum and actually recording the scene on his personal device. "The thing about surviving on a Deathworld," Sarah said, offering him a hand up that he was too stunned to refuse, "is that you learn to solve problems with whatever you have available. Broken equipment, impossible odds, angry lizard people, it is all just Tuesday to us." She hauled him to his feet with embarrassing ease, then turned to address the assembled instructors with a bright, helpful smile. "So, I was thinking, since I seem to have some free time in my schedule now, maybe I could help with training. You know, show the other recruits some of those human techniques you all seem so curious about. I promise to try not to break any more expensive equipment." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Instructor Korth quietly updating the Academy's insurance policies on his datapad. Zylth realized with growing horror that his perfect record was not just broken. It had been obliterated by someone who had been treating the entire experience as light entertainment. 3 weeks later, Instructor Zylth-Ka stood in the same training bay, watching Sarah Chen demonstrate proper disarming techniques to a group of wide-eyed Centaurian recruits. His replacement helmet, hastily ordered and significantly more expensive than the previous model, felt uncomfortable and foreign. "The key," Sarah was explaining patiently, "is not to fight the opponent's strength but to redirect it, like this." She gestured to the volunteer Andromedon, who nodded nervously and attempted a clumsy attack. Sarah barely moved, and suddenly the volunteer was on the ground, looking confused about how he had gotten there. "Excellent demonstration, Consultant Chen," Zylth said, the title still tasting strange in his mouth. The Academy's brass had been remarkably quick to create a new position once they saw the footage of his public humiliation. Apparently having a genuine Deathworlder on staff was considered a valuable recruitment asset. Sarah nodded acknowledgement, but continued her lesson. She had integrated into the academy's structure with the same casual competence she brought to everything else, somehow managing to be simultaneously the most effective student and the most requested instructor supplement they had ever seen. Zylth's internal monologue, once filled with arrogant certainty, now ran in decidedly different channels. His assumptions about species hierarchy had undergone what could charitably be called a complete renovation. The psychological profiles he had memorized, the training protocols he had perfected, the very foundations of his teaching methods, all of it required serious reconsideration. Humans, it turned out, were not the primitive, emotional weaklings he had believed them to be. They were something far more unsettling, adaptable, resourceful, and apparently incapable of recognizing when they should be properly intimidated. The Academy's communication system chimed with an incoming message. Zylth glanced at his datapad and felt his scales ripple with what was becoming a familiar sensation of dread mixed with curiosity. Zylth looked across the training bay at Sarah, who caught his gaze and offered him what he was learning to recognize as her "this should be interesting" smile. He was really going to need better insurance coverage.